Literary activism shapes cultural identity. My name is Daniel Peña, and I'll be moderating this evening. I was the 22nd Picador Guest Professor for Literature in the winter of 2017, and I have the distinct honor this evening to be in conversation with one of my favorite writers and our newest Picador Guest Professor for Literature, Oksana Marafioti. Marafioti is a US-American author of Armenian and Russian Romani descent. Her book, American Gypsy, a Memoir, was published by Farrar, Straus and Giroux in 2012. Here she interweaves stories from her childhood and youth in the Soviet Union with her experiences as an immigrant in the USA, where she moved at the age of 15. She is the founder of Las Vegas Writer Lounge, a creative writing studio. She teaches at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Her texts have appeared in the Rumpus, Slate and TIME magazine, as well as the Fairy Tale Review and Pilgrimage. Tonight, she will read from American Gypsy and her essay on Making Wishes, which you can read on the Rumpus. We're going to talk a little bit about literary activism, diaspora in character, and the pleasures and pains of writing the personal. Later in the evening, we'll answer a few of your questions. If you could please join me in giving a warm welcome to our current Picador Guest Professor for Literature, Oksana Marafioti. Oksana, what's happening? How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Daniel. It's great to see you. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited right now.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. How has the teaching been so far between the West Coast and, Leipzig?
Well, I'm lucky because I'm teaching what I love. So even though it's been probably one of the busiest years in a long time, it doesn't feel so much like work. The students make it fun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're such a master of craft. I think they're really lucky to have you. And speaking of craft, is there anything we should know before we dive into the first reading?
Well, I mean, just where I'm going to be reading from the memoir, that's my medium, right? Writing about real life. And so, but, I'm not used to reading it. It's always kind of strange to read about yourself, even though I understand that I've written a lot about myself. So I guess the craft is that we as writers of real life need to understand how we shape our personal experience, and that it is, even though it is personal, it's still something worth sharing.
Yeah. So you'll be reading from American Gypsy first?
Yes, I'll only read a little bit just from the very beginning, 2 or 3 pages or so.
Very cool. All right.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm always ready, man. I love your work.
Better question, am I ready? That's a better question. All right, so let's go for it. So again, this is the introduction of the book. The woman on the other side of the desk scribbled in her files. I studied her with interest. Perfectly manicured nails, killer perm, and a beige pantsuit with an American Embassy ID clipped to the left breast pocket. She warmed us now and then with one of those smiles that make you want to ask its owner to be your child's godparent, even if you've only just met. She didn't look like someone who held the fate of my family in her hands. Before the interview that morning, Mom had instructed Dad not to speak for 2 reasons. First, he couldn't complete a sentence without swearing. And second, but more important, he always said the wrong thing. The woman looked up from her paperwork and turned to my father. In a version of Russian that made me feel like I was teetering on a balance beam along with her, she said, "Mr. Kapelenko, tell why you won't exist in United States." I stared at Dad's fedora, thankful that at least he had given up his earrings for the day. Mom tightened her grip on her purse, and my 8-year-old sister Roxy stopped swinging her legs. Dad straightened, cleared his throat, and said in an equally precarious English, "I won't play with B.B. King, a great gypsy musician, and he like me. When he hear me play, we be rich. Here, a great musician, but nobody know. We live in 1980s, but feel like 1880s. Russian people's only like factory and tractor. I know drive tractor. I play guitar." Her name, Aphrodita. Also, he lifted his index finger to stress the importance of what was coming next. "I super good healer. I heal peoples. If you have hemorrhoid, I fix. I take tumor with bare hands. In Russia, I'm not free. I go to jail, you understand?" I was mortified, my eyes jumping between Dad, the awfully quiet American, and my mom, who'd plastered on a smile like a fresh Band-Aid. We want our girls to have a better future, Mom said in Russian, after recouping from the awkward pause. You understand, right? Years of managing a Roma performing ensemble had taught my mother the schmooze side of business. She closed many impossible deals over black caviar and bottles of Armenian cognac, items she couldn't bring to our interview, though not for lack of trying. That day, November 18th, 1989, Mom had put on a periwinkle wool dress, a fox fur coat, and a pair of Swedish-made boots, and not a flicker of jewelry except for her wedding band. She had made sure none of us looked too rich or too poor. It was important to appear like an average Soviet family. This was tricky since, as far as Americans knew, the USSR did not have a middle class and was not supposed to have an upper class, which we happened to belong to. This wasn't Mom's first trip to the embassy. Her brother, my uncle, who moved with his family to Los Angeles 3 years before, sent us a visa that was short and important form, his agreement to sponsor us when we first arrived in the States. The visa might as well have been blank without it. But Mom didn't give up, even though it took her years of networking, bribing, and entertaining in the classiest restaurants to finally get our file going. This last family interview was the key, quite literally, to freedom. And I think I will stop there.
Right on. No, I love that passage. So much of what I love about actually that, just because that's the opening salvo of the book, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. The first 3 pages.
Yeah. I mean, so much of what I love about that passage is like what I love about your writing at large, which is the funny and sad sit right next to each other. And sometimes even within the same sentence, you know, and it's really kind of that dissonance creates a kind of, it's very moving. And it's a really particular kind of, I don't know, it reminds me so much of like what Charles Dickens would call like streaky bacon, that sort of dance between like funny and sad. And just like on a craft level, I'm really intrigued by like how you do that, like between that sort of that dance, but then also moving, you know, conveying the personal in a way that is like, does this, I think of memories as something that have like a center, like a definite center. That's a sad memory. That's a happy memory. When you're writing, do you find that your memories change or your perception of the memory changes?
I think that's always the case for most of us, right? The older we get, the further away we get from a memory, the more it will change for us. And I realized that as I was writing, because I would interview the family members around a particular memory to get a better idea of what actually happened. And often between 4 people who were in the room, there were 4 different stories, you know? Mm-hmm. And that reminds me of that movie Rashomon. I'm not sure if you've seen it.
No, I haven't seen that.
It's a Japanese classic, and it talks on this. You know, it's the commentary on the faulty lines of memory, the blurred lines of memory. So I had to kind of make a decision when I was writing this to understand that I had this innocent voice of the person who was experiencing certain things at that time, as much as I remember, but also the reflective voice of the adult me, right? Yeah. Seeing that memory through the lens of an adult. And the humor, it's funny that you notice that, and I love that term, streaky bacon. The humor of it kind of comes with the territory, at least for me as a memoir writer. Memoir is often traumatic. You know, we usually don't write memoir because it's just happy memories and everything just happened perfectly, because nobody would really read it if that were the case, right? Everybody wants the drama. But I feel that if I'm writing genuinely, authentically about my experience, I have to use also my present authentic voice. And this is just how I see the world. You know, even if it's something, even in something most dramatic, I'll find some humor. And my dad used to be like that too. So I think it's kind of a genetic trait, you know?
Yeah, your dad is such a character in this story, man. It's so complex. I mean, this is part of like what I love about all the characters in your story. There's like an incredible complexity and a depth to them. And it is kind of a feat, I think, of like cramming not only just an entire family story, but, you know, I can only imagine what, and maybe we can talk about it later, just, you know, it's so much a part of what I think marginalized writers, but also, you know, like there's there's so many like, how is it that you can create that sort of story of yourself and with specificity to sort of the particular, while having those pressures of like, you know, the machine, or maybe the way in which it might be received, which I think can sometimes be a little bit stymieing or something.
Only if you think about it, right? As a writer, if
Yeah.
you're thinking too much about who's going to criticize and how they're going to push, then you will paralyze yourself and not be able to produce what you want. You mentioned marginalized writers, minority writers. Yes, we're often pushed into certain roles, sometimes without really, an ill intention. It almost sometimes comes naturally through the process that we're in right now, through how things have been built around us in this world. And we cannot write stereotypical characters, no matter how far we're being pushed to do it, because there's no such thing. A stereotypical character comes out as a cardboard character on the page. So really, I always have to remind myself when somebody comes to me and says, "Can you just write some kind of a gypsy story?" We want something fun, and I'm thinking, okay, well, if it's worth taking, then I ignore that comment first of all, and then I think about a human story. So that I learned that when I was writing the memoir, because I was, obviously there was that pressure of showing a certain community, a certain culture. And I thought, okay, well, after a while I felt the pressure. Like suddenly I had to perform in a particular way, right? And the characters had to perform. But at some point I kind of transitioned into just writing about the people that I knew. And it kind of, took that pressure off my back. And I was just writing about people, whatever they were doing. If they happened to be doing something, something unusual, well, that was their choice. And I was just writing about it.
Yeah. It's like one of my favorite lines of like that anyone's ever written. I think it's attributable to Ben Okri, where he says, "We're the product of the stories that we tell ourselves." And I was thinking about that a lot as I was reading your memoir, because I was like, did this decenter the way in which you thought about yourself after you had finished the entire thing, after it was like, edited and it was out and it was bound in a book, because you're constantly having to go and not only look at like what the center of those memories are, but the sort of the complexities, the multitudes of those memories as well. And I imagine it would, I don't know, I'm not a writer of memoirs. I have no context for this, but like, did this change the way in which you thought of yourself, or change the way in which you related to those stories?
Absolutely. And I think that if, as a memoir writer, you write a book and it doesn't change you, then you have to go back and rewrite it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I don't think I've never met a memoirist who was not changed. Who doesn't write because they expect some kind of change, either on a conscious or subconscious level. Of course, it changed me, I mean, the book, I had a professor a long time ago who once said that once you think your book is finished, then you go back and you break it. You go back and you break it. And I know you know what that means, right? You go back and you dig into it, and then you rebuild it, and then it will be finished. Well, for me, this book broke me. Oh. It did that to me. I felt like I was I was a pretty well-off adult. I was in my 30s when I wrote the book. I felt like I knew what I needed to know about life, about myself, about my family. And as I started writing the book, it literally started kind of taking some layers off me that I didn't realize I even had. And digging deeper and deeper into me, because I had to be authentic with these memories, right? When you write a memoir, every memory you write, you actually relive it on a physical level too. And once that started happening, I realized that I didn't know anything about life. Like Socrates said, the older I get, the less I know. Like, that was definitely me. I just turned around and I kind of thought, okay, well, I don't know who I am. I don't know why I am. I mean, it was pretty tough at first, and I'm grateful for it, because it feels like moving to America was a very traumatic experience. And my family and I kind of concealed it, or didn't really think about it very much, that it was traumatic. It always is traumatic for an immigrant to move to a different country and to lose their identity completely, which is what happens, is one of the most traumatic things that someone can go through.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and this is why I don't understand when people make light of a person picking up their entire life and moving to another country. You know, they say, oh, these immigrants, they just, like, it's nothing. Like, you can just pick up and go, you know, and I realized that we lost a lot in a process. And only after I wrote the memoir, I realized that I kind of have to regain some sense of my identity all over again. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I'm still going. Like, I'm still picking up the pieces.
That makes a lot of sense. When you say you lost a lot, like, could you unpack that a little bit?
Well, I mean, we were a well-to-do family, very well respected. You know, my grandparents had a reputation for decades for being incredibly known, respected performers. And we as a family, obviously, were kind of, you know, what is that expression in English? Flying on the tailcoats. What's that expression?
Yeah, so riding the tailcoats.
Yeah, riding the tailcoats, right? And things were easier, you know. I mean, things in general were easier for us because we were set in many ways. And that sense of who we were for my family, you know, my father was a musician his entire life. My mother was a performer her entire life. And then we come here and all of that is stripped away. So your sense of security is completely gone.
Yeah. Talking about stories we tell ourselves, like, the story becomes decentered, right? It's like who you are is different in the new fabric. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it happens to most people who move across borders. You know, in any capacity, you know, there's a struggle to kind of regain a sense of self, who you are in context with the new world that you're living in. Right. I mean, it's just, I respect people who are able to have a really simple, smooth transition, because I almost never meet anybody who actually does.
Yeah. It is, like you mentioned before, like, it is kind of, when people talk about moving willy-nilly, it comes from like a position of privilege in some way.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot about, like, there's so many, I mean, we heard so many people from the last so many years talk about, like, with Trump and stuff, you know, I'm going to move here or I'm going to move there. Did you ever, but then there was a part, like, I'm thinking of, like, conversations I had with my mom, who's from Mexico, or born in Mexico, where, like, in the last 4 years, she's like, fuck, did we make a mistake? Like, you come here, like, oh shit, this is bad. Right. And it looks, I mean, this tale has not been written yet, but it's pretty bad, man. It got pretty bad in the last 4 years.
I mean, my dad started saying that only after a few years of living in the United States.
Really?
That he made a mistake, yeah. But again, he had a very unconventional life. He was lucky in that he was allowed to live an unconventional life, and it was free. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but in many ways, he had more freedom in the old country than he realized he did here, because he came here as a musician in his 40s. And realized, well, everybody in America wants to be a musician, an actor, a model, you know, everybody wants to be a celebrity. And it's very difficult to make your name. Yeah. And he felt like people were not connecting. You know, we were used to kind of having these huge dinners with friends and family. And once in America, all of that also broke down. And people became more isolated and more individualistic, you know. As long as I'm happy, you know, it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing, which is kind of what we're seeing, you know, sadly now, right? That like sense of, like, well, I need to be happy. My sense of freedom needs to be met. I don't care that these other things are happening around me. And that's definitely not a place, not a culture that I come from.
Yeah. I got to say, like, coming back, I just came back from Berlin like a few days ago, and what really shocked me was the kind of, I had forgotten about that aspect in the context of COVID, which is like, I mean, we got to talk about that a little, because it's like kind of why we're doing it on StreamYard, on YouTube, right? But I'm like, that is a real thing, and you see it on full display as, like, I got mine, like, libertarian hellscape, like, I don't care about anyone else. Yeah, I don't know. Are you thinking about this moment in your writing? Are you thinking about this moment in the personal?
I mean, I'm journaling a lot about this. Obviously, I'm writing, essay forms, nonfiction, creative nonfiction. And to be honest, I'm mad and I'm disappointed. I wish that I could say to everyone that I hear say things like, well, I don't know anybody who died of COVID, therefore it's not as serious. Or people who say, well, everybody's going to get sick anyway. I wish that I could reach all of them and just like act like a parent, and say, you know what? I'm really disappointed in your behavior right now. Like, go to your room.
It's such a dark, the selfless or selfishness of it. It's a really dark instinct, because it's not, it'd be one thing, like, it goes as deep as some people thinking, like, if I get sick, but it's like, no, but you're going to kill people. Like, you know what I mean? And it's everywhere. This is a crazy thing. I just got back from Berlin. I was in Kreuzberg. And there's a lot of the sort of the Querdenker thing is really strong there. And people will come up to you and be like, take off your mask. And it got to the point where my wife it's a weird thing for someone to like ask you to take a article of clothing off your body. You know what I mean? Because someone come up, my wife's like, you should just shout at them to take off their pants. And it only happened like one time after that, but it was very satisfying. Some guys like, take off your mask. I was like, take off your pants. And he's like, what? You know what I mean?
Well, it's fear, right? Fear drives people to behave this way. And I think many things that I describe in my book, I didn't realize that it was going to go on these lists of like the best books about dysfunctional families, because I didn't think my family was dysfunctional until people started saying so after reading it. And then I went back and read it and I was like, yeah, there's definitely some dysfunctionality in the family. But I think many things that my family members were acting, what they were acting upon, what they were responding to once we moved to America was fear. It was fear of the unknown. It was the unraveling of a family system due to the environment that we suddenly lived in. It wasn't just this crazy family just suddenly acting really eccentric and doing these things, but it really was in response to, like you said, this decentralized sense of belonging. Which nobody felt any longer. And so fear really, I think, is at the core of most of our behavior when it seems really erratic and angry or whatever it is. And we're seeing a lot of that now, I believe. I think that's, if somebody says, well, we're all going to get sick, I feel like that's response to fear, even if they don't admit it. As a memoirist, as someone who studies human behavior by way of what I write and what I write, that's how I feel about it. Yeah,
the fatalism is interesting. And the multitudes of that are interesting. And speaking of multitudes, I want to get into your second, this essay. It's a brilliant essay from the Rumpus. I have it pulled up here. Remind me of the title again. It's called
On Making Riches.
Yes. Could you set this up for us before we get into it, or should we just dive right in?
I can just do a quick intro. I actually just talked about it, right? So after writing the book, I really wanted to write a book about writing a book about writing a memoir and how it can kind of unravel a person. Sometimes it can be, it gives you unexpected results. And it did to me, where basically I was hiding my identity for a long time, especially the Romani part of my heritage, for obvious reasons. In Europe, it's not a very safe place to say that you're Roma. And I did such a good job hiding that, my family did in some ways, in America, that after writing the book, I didn't, for some reason, realize, I don't know why it didn't kind of set in, that everybody's going to know now. I don't know why I didn't, I should have thought about this. And I think my mom actually mentioned it before I wrote the book. She said, everybody's going to know. And so the essay is a response to that unraveling. What happens after you write a book and suddenly your secret is out. So I will read, I think 5 sections of it, 5 short sections of it.
Cool.
All right. Part 1, to find her. I sit on the floor of my bedroom with photos fanned around me like the ruffles of a long vintage skirt. The black and white shots contain my mythology, images of the many relatives I don't know, but whose stories help define me. Some photos are so old that in place the color black fades into smoky silhouettes, and the color white bursts into transparency. But others are vivid, more familiar. I find my grandparents and parents aunts and uncles, and an impressive assortment of cousins. I gather photos of them posing with tambourines and guitars, garbed in traditional Romani costumes, colorful wide-sleeved blouses and flowy skirts for women, and for men, silk shirts and tight black pants tucked into knee-high leather boots. Concert costumes, to be exact, not daily wardrobe, used by the members of the touring band my grandfather headlined between the 1940s and 1980s in the former Soviet Union. In an image dated 1979, my parents are on stage. Come to think of it, they're on stage in most of my photos and memories. Growing up, I watched their lives unfold in the limelight. I was intrigued by them, like a groupie, and years later, this fascination compelled me to write a book about them. In this particular photo, my father strums a 12-string guitar while my mother sings, which song I can't recall, but I do remember that I had interrupted the concert by running out onto the stage. I was 5, my dance routine superb. Of course, grandfather disagreed. After catching me under one arm, he stormed off the stage and carried me to the dressing room. His tap dance boots clicked in frustration all the way down the corridor. When he disposed me onto the chair and leaned down, I could see the shiny black eyeliner just behind his long eyelashes and smell the chalkiness of his face powder. At 60, he still performed in every show. He prided himself on being professional. Obviously, I had just upset the order of things. "Сиди и не двигайся," he growled and stuck a finger in my face. His nearly 7-foot-tall presence felt scarier than the woods outside our house. Per orders, I sat and didn't move for the rest of this show. No one disobeyed the band leader, although that didn't mean that once my fear subsided, I wouldn't try it again. I did, a rebel, or a child who hasn't learned her boundaries, dependent on who you asked. Memories drift like smoke signals. I rummage through more photos, most of which are from my adolescence, the time when I cherished the stage, when I was the moth to its rain, addicted. I don't know why I loved it so much exactly. Perhaps I saw magic in it, the people familiar to me from birth, transforming into fairy queens and kings once their feet touched its wooden planks. The royalty, the Roma spirit unrestrained by daily struggles. Perhaps it simply meant freedom. But at this moment in time, I'm 36, reasonably sensible, and I've come to this room to hide. Finally, I fish out what I think will do, a snapshot of my 15-year-old self, pondering, unsmiling, so trustworthy. Part 2, to start a bonfire. I had always wanted to write a book. Even before I knew it, stories tumbled out of my mouth before I could read or write. As a child, I told them, lived them. As a teen, I stuffed my desk drawers with hundreds of handwritten pages and kept writing more without a goal. It felt good. It felt enough. The memoir was a different story. I wrote impatiently and with a frantic desire for only one thing: to finish a book other people would read. And when it was completed, a great sense of triumph came over me, a revelation that it was actually possible. Not only did this Roma writer have important things to say, but she also knew about Oxford commas. Grandpa often warned his performers against inflated egos. And mine, let's just say that for the first month, I took regular trips to the local bookstore to check how many copies they'd sold. And now, I want to destroy the book, every copy. Burn each in a pile on the front lawn of my house where all neighbors can see. For a while, I sit quietly, feeling the heat emanating from my imaginary bonfire. The girl in the photo, she waits. I have so much to say to her, but the words, well, they're damned behind my teeth, driftwood piled up. So eventually, it is she who speaks first. "Is that your aim?" she asks. "To be deconstructed like some abandoned Soviet-era factory, taken to pieces for mere parts? Are you really going to let a book do that to you?" I sit back and blow air through my nose like a bull. Part 3, to never steal a single ring. Earlier in the week, I sat at a long table, shoulder to shoulder with other authors, all signing our books at a local festival. We were proud mamas and papas with our babies stacked in neat rows in front of us. Next to me sat a well-known art critic. I could see that he exuded importance and wisdom. He was large and wore silver Southwestern rings and bracelets. He reminded me of the Old West cowboys I'd read about back in Moscow. "I'm Fred," the critic introduced himself, with an amicable smile and a firm handshake. He asked about my book. A memoir about growing up in a Roma family, was my reply. His fingers tightened for an instant and withdrew gently. Well then, I better make sure none of my rings have gone missing, he chuckled. It is true that I'm talking to a photo, but I'm not crazy. Fools are oblivious, at least those from my childhood fairy tales. I, on the other hand, am perfectly aware of the problem. Why else would I be doing this new agey therapy thing? The problem then? I'll tell you. It is socially acceptable to insult a Roma. Anyone can meet a gypsy, the word being an insult, at a friend's house or at dry cleaners. The occasion doesn't matter. What does is that once the person reveals their Romani heritage, most likely this new acquaintance will insult them, deliberately or inadvertently, or even with the best of intentions. My experience with the art critic is the perfect example of that. My answer to him was a smile. Most Roma would do the same, tilt their head in amusement, say they haven't stolen a thing in ages, play along for however long necessary. But don't be fooled by this easy response, by this self-defense mechanism. A Roma is taught early on not to take such exchanges to heart, lest they wish their heart repeatedly broken. However, pretending not to be offended eventually grinds at the core of your soul, and sooner or later, if you're not careful, you're either reduced to a splinter or a sharp-pointed stake. You either lose your identity, or you're constantly angry at the world because of it. Even though I know I should ignore the critic's reaction, I'm at the point where I can no longer pretend not to hurt. Which am I, the splinter or the stake? Could I be both? I am devoted to and in defiance of my heritage. My very soul is part my identity, part my resistance to it. I am Roma, but I cannot escape the gypsy. And I think I will stop there.
Wow, that's such a powerful
Thank you.
passage. The line that jumps out to me is that sort of, you were either reduced to a splinter or a sharp pointed stake. And it's such a, I think about so much of this is like, there's parallel between, the dignities or indignities of, the book, but then also that scene with Fred. My first warning sign was like his Southwest getup. That character,
Right.
that I'm familiar with his character living in Texas. And I was like, oh, no, he's a guy, don't trust him. He's a bad guy.
The appropriation in there, I didn't realize it when it was happening. Even him as an image of appropriation,
Yeah. Off of YouTube, I'll tell you some stories. I got stories to tell about these guys. But for me, like, dignity is so much at the heart of, like, that is the pathway through which for me, I feel like when I read your pieces, whether it's your memoir or your essays, at sort of getting at these sort of multitudes. But I feel like, I guess it's a really long-winded way of saying, like, do you feel like you've gotten, as you've progressed in your career and as you progressed as a writer, do you feel like you care less and less about that instinct, which you said at the beginning, where you're like, when I wrote a memoir, I just wanted to write a book that people liked? Or now is it just kind of like, whatever,
Absolutely. Now I'm more concerned about what feels genuine to me. So I often write something and let it go because it doesn't feel authentic enough. That's the problem that I run into now as a writer with a little bit more experience, where to me it feels like I understand my writer self, and sometimes my writer self wants to write something just for the sake of writing. And this other wiser self, the person who's wizened up after the memoir experience, then gently talks to the writer self and says, well, is this genuine? Is this really something that needs to be said? Find something that needs to be said, because every word should count. I do feel now that I, as a writer, am responsible for what I write.
Yeah.
I mean, the audience, we need the audience, right? Of course, we still are, I believe that writers are performers. I believe we're artists. We cannot be without our audience. But I also feel like if it's not worth saying, it doesn't matter. If you know what I mean, I don't need to produce something that's not worth saying for me personally.
Yeah. I feel like so much of the pressure that's put on especially marginalized writers, like you have that line going back to that imagery. It's a great image. You can either be, what is it, the stake or the splinter. And there's so much of the publishing apparatus, which is not literature. Publishing and literature, I feel like, are two separate things, right?
Absolutely.
That ask you to be both. You need to be fierce and you need to be accessible, right? Or you need to be somehow a conveyor of, or a foothold into the culture, but then also be able to speak on behalf of like the entire culture, which is like, the pressures are like, right? It's like, no, that's not how, but it's a pressure that doesn't get, I'm thinking that, there's a great book Toni Morrison had written, essentially how like the Western canon was created, right? But it's something that doesn't get put on a lot of, frankly, just white male writers. And it's a thing that publishing is continually asking of us. And I don't know, did you, like, the saddest line for me was that, where you said, I want to just burn my books, just go to the front yard and burn them. Like, could you take me to that moment where you're like,
yeah,
well, maybe not, you don't have to.
No, I can. I definitely can. So that much scrutiny I was not expecting. I knew I should have, but I didn't have any experience in publishing before this memoir. And so being suddenly put under a microscope and scrutinized was very difficult at first, especially because it's a memoir. So when people were analyzing characters, they weren't analyzing characters, they were analyzing me and my family members. And that was very difficult to process. I'm totally fine with people critiquing a fiction story, if it's a novel, because that's a product that you worked on. It's part of you, but it's not really you. Whereas a memoir is literally a crazy writer saying, here, let me share some of my deepest secrets with you,
Yeah.
Because that's what we do. And I mean, I read a lot of memoirs and I see that. And you never know how people are going to perceive it. And it was just a lot of pressure I was not used to. I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like I said, I feel grateful to this book for many, many different things. That's why I actually still want to write a book about writing a memoir, about writing that memoir, because it opened my eyes. It started this adventure, What you said earlier about being kind of pushed to adhere to these very, very unrealistic expectations, right, as marginalized writers, reminded me of the story that I heard about Romani performers in Russia. So this is 18th century. They are trying to assimilate to a society, which is, historically speaking, what the Roma people were trying to do wherever they were, is trying to be part of a group, part of the society, but often ostracized instead. In Russia, they were giving these opportunities, Imperial Russia, right? And the performers, the Romani performers, would organize these large performing bands, that would have over 20 people. So there would be a choir, there would be musicians and dancers, and they would perform in front of the wealthy Russians, the aristocracy. And the Russian aristocracy loved these Roma performers so much that they became valuable in the society. And so eventually, some of these Roma were thinking, all right, well, now we've kind of assimilated. We found our niche. And they started performing in Russian clothing. So they stopped wearing traditional clothing and they would just wear everyday Russian clothes. And they were told at that point, you can't do that. Even though we accept you as a valuable part of the artistic output, in our society, you're still a gypsy. So you need to perform in your own costumes, even though we appreciate you. And I think sometimes the publishing industry does this to marginalized writers. We appreciate your talent, but you still need to perform in costume, and this is why the diaspora in character, you need to stay in character. You can't get too comfortable, because if you get too comfortable, then we're no longer reading about your unique experience, right?
Yeah.
You become.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go for it.
I was gonna say, this is part of what I love about your book, is you talk about because, and this is a conversation with even Mexican American literature, like, what is Mexican? There are many Mexicos, just like there are many Romani, right? You talk about the Armenian and then the sort of, but the last name is Ukrainian. but then you have in Russian, and then there's a diaspora, right? And so it's like, what even is the center of that? There's a definite compulsion by like publishing, or even just sometimes readers, to sort of essentialize what that is, and to sort of take away some sort of like I think of this in terms of like business talk. It's like, what is the deliverable, right? What can I take away from this book, or what can I, and you see this a lot, and you see this a lot from some books written by marginalized groups, like, help. And it's a good, in some ways, it's a very innocent impulse, like, help me change or help me expand my worldview. But there is a machine, an apparatus that really does systematically strip, I think, dignity from marginalized creators, that in a way that it doesn't allow for complexity.
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely agree. I'm co-editing a special issue for a journal out of Central European University. And it's the entire issue is focusing on what is Romani identity, right? And so all these amazing Romani writers are writing on identity, what they perceive their Romani identity to be, and because it's still a big question. And so that makes me think a lot about what identity is just in general. And I made a post on Facebook as I was kind of trying to write my own intro to this journal. And I just asked my American friends, what is it to be American? And most people either had very, very kind of sweet memories, Thanksgiving dinner, some of them, but most said, well, you can't really put an American identity into a box and then put a ribbon around it. It's too complex, right? And then I'm thinking, well, this is interesting because I'm generalizing here, but white writers in general are not asked this question. What is white identity, right? It seems like it's already in place and it's operating, even though obviously it's complex. However, marginalized writers, we're constantly being asked who we are. Yeah. We are constantly being forced to chase our identity, to reinvent our identity, instead of understanding that it's multifaceted, just like identity is, right? Yeah. Identity is never something that you can put on the shelf and it remains as it is for thousands of years. It changes with culture, it changes with society, it changes with each generation. And yet, and I do feel like this is a way to keep a certain group on their toes, always a little worried, because we don't quite have an identity apparently yet.
Yeah. Or their identity is what they empirically have distilled it to be. Like you saw this in the 2020 election, where people are like, I can't tell you how many people have come up to me and like, explain the Latino vote. And I'm like, which one, man? Cubans, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, like Texas Mexicans, California Mexicans, like another thing. But it's a kind of a seemingly innocent question, but there's also something right beneath that, which is like, it is outside of the realm of their imaginations to see us as people with agency.
Right. Or
like you're saying, to evolve as a culture or a people. Like by now there's so many Mexicans that live, like I happen to have my Mexican citizenship. I'm Mexican, whatever that means, right? But it's like, there's somebody like, oh, you're not really Mexican, or you're not really. I'm like, well, I am, like I go to Mexico, I use the Mexican passport.
Yeah, and that's the thing, it comes from within too. It comes from within the communities, right? Yeah. We're asked if we happen to straddle more than one world, we are asked who we are. Well, you're not really this because you don't speak the language, you don't look the look, So it's not just, obviously, like I said, I was generalizing when I just used the word, white writer. I actually really dislike doing that, but it doesn't just come from outside. It doesn't just come from without. It comes from within as well, right? Mm-hmm. It's so internalized that we are often constantly being asked to find a category for ourselves.
Yeah,
this is for writers. This is a very, very difficult task.
Yeah, and then they're like, "Hey, speak on behalf of all of you guys."
Oh yeah,
it's like, "Hey, speak on behalf of all Mexicans, or speak on behalf of all." And then when you're a writer, they make you do that. You're like, oh.
And I mean, maybe you have a voice. I mean, maybe just me being here, I can give a little like a add to the unified voice of the community. But there's no way that I can speak on behalf. I mean, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
I don't quite understand that. I think we need to write about that.
Yeah. one of my favorite lines from I think Ta-Nehisi Coates's I think it's Between the World and Me, that book, where he says every culture is like entitled to its mediocre people too. And I kind of like that. I like that quote. Whoa! I'm like, I like it so much. I just flipped over the laptop because it really talks about, because it, like those things where people say, like, talk about the unsavory parts or talk about this. Like, there's this pressure for like excellence in some way, or you got to rep and you yourself have to be excellent in some way. But like, I don't know. There's some days where I'm just like, it'd be kind of cool to be a mediocre writer. You know?
I mean, we're all mediocre in some way. I mean, I believe that sometimes these are the characters that are the most interesting in fiction. I mean, when I teach fiction, you know, when I teach creative writing, the conversation about writing characters is huge, especially right now, right?
Yeah.
How do you write characters ethically, especially people who come from groups that you don't know very much about? Yeah. I mean, did you see what happened with American Dirt?
Dude, I was accidentally in the center of that. It came to my door. I didn't fucking come to its door.
Oh.
Maybe I shouldn't talk about it on YouTube, but
we'll talk about this.
She ripped off a lot of stuff from Luis Alberto Urrea, a lot of narco books. And I kept getting emails being like, have you read it? Have you read it? I was like, no. But then it got on The Guardian and it got onto a bunch of places. It was funny because it was like the best my book had ever done. But I was like, oh, that's a shitty way to like do well. You know what I mean? Like, it's in the valence of this other book that, but yeah, this is part and parcel though, where like someone will trust the quote unquote neutral or sort of like a white gaze to do that story justice when it's like there are people. I think what irked me, and this is kind of a tangent, but what irked me about that book was like with Bang, I lived in Mexico and I had met so many people, like journalists who had died, like, you know, finding these stories, telling the truth, in a nascent post-truth era, right? In which that we think of that thing as new, but it's always been around. But like, it's been in Mexico, it's sort of the drug wars that's been written about. There's always been a lot of misinformation and it's a larger story, but for the protection of the Mexican government, and they spin stories. But there was a lot of journalists I met who died telling those stories, and for a book to come out and to sort of like, kind of, you know, piss all over the grave of those people with those, by perpetuating the disinformation of the drug war. I think that's what really ground my gears about that. And then like Oprah got on it, and then I was just like, oh man, so now it's like legit. Now it's like stamped.
Yeah.
Like, you know, but that's the thing. It's like, there are like 9 or 10 different writers who did it well, really well, you know, and who like risked their lives. I mean, I'm not saying that I did that story any justice. There are a lot of regrets I have about my own book, but there are people I know who I've met who I was like, fuck, they did the legwork. They were there. Melissa Del Bosque is one of them, man. She was like risked her life for.
And that's the thing. Like, why aren't we highlighting? You know, I don't. A lot of it is kind of a chance. You know, like a chance thing. It's like they pick up a writer who might be doing well for whatever, or they feel the publishing industry feels they're going to do well, and they kind of propel them, right? They promote them and do all of that stuff. But why not find writers who are, like you said, working in the trenches? You know, it might take a little bit more work, but it's possible. But I mean, the reason why I mentioned American Dirt was because of this, how we handle characterization as writers, right? Like, do you handle it responsibly? Do you understand, like, what group your character comes from and what does this mean? And again, it goes back to like not writing universal or stereotypical characters and finding the ordinary, the mediocre sometimes even, right? The everyday, and writing about people, you know? And so if you're a writer from outside of a community trying to write someone from within the community, you need to write a person. And I see, you know, this goes back to how I feel about this diaspora still being in character, written in character, and many marginalized communities, what you just mentioned in American Dirt, are written in character instead of being written as human beings with their very personal individual experiences, which happen to tap into universal themes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think as writers, we still have a lot to learn. And I do feel as marginalized writers, that learning is made just a little bit more difficult. But, you know, sometimes when you go through a tough experience, it actually benefits you more than having everything easy. I don't know. Maybe I'm being naive here. You know,
No, I get you.
you could call me out on that.
No, I get you. I mean, to this end, like, who are some of the writers from your community that you're excited about right now? Who are you reading? Who are like, man, they're doing it well, or they're doing they're pushing the edge, or they're pushing the needle?
Well, some of the writers who are going to be in this issue that I'm co-editing are pretty incredible. Jessica Reedy is one of them. She's an activist as well. And she's, you know, her voice, we have so many women in the community who have picked up the reins, you know, who are going out there and saying, look, that's not what we are. Take a closer look. And they are unafraid, you know. It's like, this is the authentic voice of a community. Also, Cecilia Wallach, she's a poet. Yeah, she's a pretty well-known poet, actually. And she has some incredible poetry out there. She's really well connected to the community in California. And Damien Labas just came out with Stopping Places. He's a British Romani writer. And, you know, his story, it's kind of a memoir. He's going on a journey to find the history of his family. So it's similar. It seems like a lot of Roma writers are writing about figuring out what their identity is. So going back to that conversation, the ones that I mentioned, they're all talking to some degree in some ways about identity and belonging and home. And all of the stories that I read for the special issue had to do with belonging and home and identity. So it seems like it's an ongoing thing, but now people are not afraid to talk about it openly. Yeah. So there are things coming out. The problem is that, from what I understand, European Romani writers are not given as many opportunities to publish traditionally. There's still this ostracized view of like, well, if it's a Gypsy writer, they probably don't write very well, you know. And I've heard these stories personally. Wow. In fact, my book was translated to Czech a couple of years ago, and I heard from someone who worked in the publishing that the first time the publisher heard, you know, when it was presented to them, like, here's a book by a Roma writer from America, they said, oh, well, if it's Gypsy, then it's probably not so good. I mean, they did it, they read it, and they understood it eventually. But that seems to be a very natural go-to at this point, which is really sad because these narratives are beautiful. You know, they might not all of them might adhere to the Western aesthetic of what's proper, you know, format for a narrative story, but we need to keep expanding as a writing community, as artists. You know, we can't just set rules and then tell everyone this is the only way that you can write. Yeah. Right? These are the tropes that you can follow. These are the particular, you know, this is what makes a good story good, right? Yeah. Like we have to be open for experimentation and seeing narratives that we've never seen before. How else do we grow?
Yeah. And then like someone else does it and then it gets into like, you know, like top indie press publications. You're like, I can't tell you how many times like you see like really innovative, like Mexican American lit, the same thing. People say, oh, if it's written by a Mexican American writer, it must not be that good.
Oh my gosh.
And it's a constant fight, man. But then also there's part of me like going back to this idea of like publishing is not literature. I think the thing, and there's that line you said you wanted to write a book before you even knew what that kind of like, you don't know where that impulse came from. And I'm familiar with this feeling. I'm familiar with that work. I'm very familiar with that feeling. But I always remind myself too, it's like, man, like publishing is going to do what it's almost like it's a variable that we can't control in some way. But what we can control, I think, is like the work. And but yeah, they're the concessions that we make. We try to, I don't know, for me, I'm always thinking about ways to mitigate that. Like, what are the concessions that I make to the machine to get whatever work I'm passionate about? And it's like, and some of those asks can be frankly quite racist. Like,
yeah. You know, and you don't, you know, they don't understand them. And, you know, to be honest, even though I did have a difficult experience writing the book, so my book was sold before I wrote it. You know, it was just sold on like the first 60 pages. And I ended up working with the editor at FSG for 3 years before its release, right? And even though it was really hard, and yes, some of the things she asked for, we had to go back and discuss because maybe she didn't understand or I didn't understand. The experience for me was invaluable because I learned about writing. It was kind of like going through an MFA program, but it's in a very different way, right?
Yeah.
So I cannot complain. I cannot complain about that experience. I was treated well. I had an incredible agent who for some reason believed me. I just told her this story and she was just, this needs to be out. Like, you need to talk about this and we need it, and she was very gentle with me. And so I didn't have, it was a traumatizing experience because of the way that I was writing it. The writing of it was traumatizing, because I had to relive things that I had forgotten about for decades. But I did have, when it comes to actual publishing team, my agent and editor, I think, did a really good job, as well as they could. And I think they both knew what they were dealing with, Yeah. They both knew that it was a very tricky topic to write about. And so when they pushed, mostly like when the editor, when she would push and I pushed back, we would find the middle ground. Yes, she wanted to see more stories about Roma. My first drafts, I didn't have as many stories about Roma part, like culture and everything. Because to me, it seemed like, well, this is just, everybody knows it. I didn't realize that it was not something that American public knew very much about. And of course, to her, it was interesting, and she could say, well, tell me more about this. Tell me more about this. I want to know more about this. So eventually we found a middle ground. Of course, before we found a middle ground or a way to communicate better, I would cry in the middle of the night and be like, I'm not writing this book anymore. It's too hard. That's it. And she kept kind of bringing me back, and we kept kind of reaffirming our relationship, So she was learning from me and I was learning from her. But yes, in general, publishing business is a business, right? It's a business.
Yeah.
And,
but
no, keep going. Go ahead.
I was going to say, no, your book, I mean, it's a really beautiful book. And part of like what I love about it are the characters do feel three-dimensional. Like the magic of that book is the characters. And I love the family, right? But I also the weird details, like the Michael Jackson jacket, right? And things like that you went out. Yeah, the weird the dollar store where you found out that your uncle was buying all the presents from, and stuff like that. Like, these little textual details. I'm like, God, you can't make that up. It's just, it's alive. You know what I'm saying? But it's a really remarkable work.
Thank you. Well, the visual stuff really, what helped me, I think, was my background in film. I worked in film before I moved to writing, and in film, everything's visual, right?
Yeah, I read you used to fix cameras.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Long time ago. Those giant cameras, the Panavisions.
I'm thinking of things that swing around.
Yeah.
That's cool.
The storytelling in film, you can learn so much, right? By looking at a film as a writer and learn storytelling. And so I think that helped me because I kept trying to think, okay, well, actually, I didn't have to think very hard. Like when I was doing that, when I was writing those parts of my book, that came easy because I was just visualizing my story like a movie. And it also helped me get through the hard parts as well. Because I thought, all right, well, just imagine. Have you ever seen that? There's a movie with a title like Beverly Hills, Slums of Beverly Hills.
No, I've seen Beverly Hill. I've seen Beverly Hill Cop with.
No.
That's the only one That's the only Beverly Hill movie I know.
I think this one is called like The Slums of Beverly Hills or something, and it was like about this really, really kind of poor or poor family, the father and kids, living right on the outskirts of Hollywood, of Beverly Hills, because they want to feel what it feels like to be rich. I'm simplifying the plot. But to me, that's what it felt like. Like my book was kind of like that movie. It's kind of quirky. It has this kind of satirical note to it, the film itself, And so when I was writing the book, I kept kind of envisioning the movie, showing these quirky characters trying to pretend that they belong in this completely different world, and not doing a very good job of it. But
yeah, no, it really resonates. I mean, it's such a for me, it's a really remarkable work. But then, like, I read the essays that you're working on right now, and it's just like, I can see that, I don't know, this is weird to even think about or talk about. It's weird to talk about it with you because I'm like talking to you as if like you're a static thing, but the trajectory of your career, I'm like looking at it, I'm like, oh my God, this is like, I mean, it's, you're thinking about things that in a really, your newest stuff in a really philosophical way, but I see the seeds of it in the memoir. And it's been kind of cool just to read all this stuff, sequentially.
Yeah. It's kind of a natural thing. Yeah, it kind of happened by way of writing memoir, where I started thinking a little bit more about life in those terms, trying to detect what things mean, which is funny because my 13-year-old is doing that now. He's a philosopher now.
Yeah.
He just asked me what the difference is between forgetting something and not thinking about it.
Oh shit!
Wrap your brain around that one.
you just ruined the rest of my day. I don't. Oh God! Now I'm gonna have to think about that. What are the things that's strategically forgotten? Wow.
Yeah. He said, just because you're not thinking about something for years doesn't mean that you forgot it.
Shit.
And that's the kind of stuff I'm thinking about now, as a byproduct of a memoir that forced me to think about things on a deeper level.
I think I got to hang up now, man. That's like.
If anyone has an answer to that one, please reach out.
Put it in the chat. Speaking of the chat, we have a few questions.
Okay.
I'm going to move on because I always enjoy talking to you. Like, I feel like every time I talk to you, I learn like those things. And I'm just like, fuck, now I got to think about that, right? But I don't know. I've talked to Oksana, but you're always so good for my writing. I always talk to you and I come away with like 9 or 10 things. I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that. But let's get to the questions because we have a few questions here. This is for Oksana. Performance plays a big part in the stories you tell about your family, and you yourself also worked as a pianist before. What role has performance played in your self-understanding as a writer?
I think a lot more than I gave it credit to. When you're a performer, you're taught that you're speaking a secret language with the audience. And it's a language only you and your audience understands. And I feel like as a writer, even though obviously you don't know your audience, just like a performer, you usually don't, we actually follow that same trajectory across the publishing borders, across screens if somebody's reading online, across bookstores. When the reader picks up our book, they are reading a secret language. It's in the subtext of what we write, right? It's in the white spaces between the writing. And so I feel like, just like a performer, you make a pact. Mm-hmm. You make a pact with your reader to give them the most genuine expression that you can give them. So even though it's public, your reader will understand it on a very, very intimate level. And, I'm sure you've seen this too when somebody comes up to you and says, I can really relate to this section of your book or what you wrote here. I've had, when the book first came out, I had a few people write to me, younger people, high school, age, write to me and say, you saved my life. I read the book and I felt like somebody understood what I was going through. Yeah. And I feel like performance teaches you that. And also, I am not in that school of thought of writers who feel like they're just writing for themselves and damn everybody else. I don't believe how that works. Because really, if we feel that way as a writer, this applies to all performers, right? To all artists. If you feel like you're just writing for yourself, then why have an audience in the first place? Why not just keep everything to yourself, right? So if you are presenting your work to somebody else, that means that you seek out an audience, which makes you a performer, right? And we have this negative connotation to the word performance, at least in American, Western culture, like, oh, you're performing. But if you think about it, we're all performing every day.
Yeah.
You and I are performing right now.
Yeah, you just read my mind. Like now I'm like, shit, I'm conscious of it. You're saying you ruin it when you're conscious of it with the writing.
It's not a bad thing because a performance means simply that you are picking out a certain part of your personality. We have so many, we have a multiplicity of selves inside us. Yeah. And when you perform, you choose one and you present it to the audience because this is the one that you hope that they relate to. You know? So it's definitely impacted a lot. This is why I love doing readings and talks because I feel like, well, this is also satisfying that performance need that I have, to directly connect.
Yeah. Right now, I'm the guy at like the grocery store that chat, like I'm just talking to people, like random people. Got my little collar on. That's the personality I'm choosing right now. Grocery store guy. We got a question from Dennis. You discussed the publishing world and how publishers are not literature. What are your thoughts about independent self-publishing these days?
Well, this is something that's happening whether we like it or not. Self-publishing and independent publishing are different because we have a lot of indie publishers who are doing great things, right? Like Grey Wolf Press, for example. Self-publishing is great. It's giving us access, right, directly to our audience. So you don't have to go through that publishing machine, right? However, I think that the reason why it has, it's given itself kind of a bad name, it's because of the quality, right? As a writer going through a publishing machine, you know that you're going to be checked again and again, right? And somebody's going to try to work with you. Your editor essentially is trying to get the book to its most polished state because their reputation also depends on it, right? I see a lot of self-published authors who don't really work on the book enough. So if you know how to work on your book well enough, if you understand the editing process, if you understand the craft, and you understand how to shape a narrative story that the audience can relate to, then yes, more power to you. You probably will do really well. The problem I have with self-publishing, and again, it's not a problem, it's just an observation, is that writers often think that writing is not really a job. Have you noticed that, Daniel? Like, I don't know, when you meet like writers who are starting out or people who are just talking about writers, like if you tell them, oh, I'm a writer, they're like, oh, I always wanted to write a book.
Yeah.
Maybe I will when I retire. Like you can just sit down and whip it out.
Or they'll come up to you at your reading and be like, I have an idea and let's split the earnings. And they're just like, hey, if you can listen to my story, we'll split it right down. I'm like, usually it's a boring story.
I know, I get that all the time too. I have a story, I don't have time to write it, but can you do it? If you do it, it'll be a bestseller. I get it all the time in airports, coffee shops. But the thing is that writing is a craft. Yes, we've all written since we were kids. Yes, you might have the most brilliant mind and ideas, right? But there is a craft that needs to be learned, even if you're super talented, right? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Even if you're extremely talented, you need to read the writers that resonate with you. You need to pick their writing apart to see how it's put together, If writing was easy, all of us would be doing it all the time and making a lot of money. It's one of the hardest things also because writing as a mode of communication, language is the newest mode we have compared to dance and art and music. Our prehistoric brain, that lizard brain, is still learning how to speak. Yeah. So as writers, we're actually working in the mode that we know the least about on that very primal level. Yeah. So if you're self-publishing, then you're doing everything you can to learn about the craft.
Yeah.
That would be the short answer. I could have just said that.
We have this one. It says, Oksana, you mentioned that you had your book sold before you wrote it. Do you feel it was a relief for you, or rather a huge stone sitting on your chest when you were in the process of writing it?
I'm trying to understand the question.
I think what they're asking is like, was it a relief to have the book under your belt or under contract and then write it? Or once you've had it under contract, was that like a huge burden or something?
I think it was both.
Yeah.
I have to say it's both. It's not like a fairy tale story. It's not like a Cinderella story, You sign a book contract and suddenly everything's flowers and butterflies. The work was very hard and I almost quit several times. And I think it would have been the same had I not gotten the book deal before the book came out. So it's both. It's of course it was a relief because there's a book deal, but also if you know the industry, you understand that the book deal can always fall through. If your book is just not up to par for whatever reason, or if you kind of refuse to make some major changes to it, which luckily I didn't have to do. Everybody, both sides have the freedom to break the contract. So
yeah.
it's not a guarantee of publishing, right?
Yeah. We have a question for both of us, which is both your writing seems to often show people that escape, run away, struggle to go somewhere, or are trapped and sometimes brought back to where they started from. What function and role do mobility and immobility, movement and stasis play in your writing?
I think that's a very complicated question right there,
Yeah.
isn't it? I feel like that. I think that goes back to understanding who you are, right? Recapturing that sense of identity. The movement and stasis are the natural existence of reality. This is what we are, right? We constantly evolve, but we're also constantly static, depending on the period in our time, depending on a certain area of our life. And I think it's in that go, stop and go is in between those things is where our real identity, our true identity lies. Mm-hmm. And it feels to me, I think the reason why I employ a lot of that movement is because I'm constantly seeking that sense of arrival, right? Mm-hmm. Which might not even be there. It might just be, maybe it's just the adventure that I'm drawn to, yeah. not the destination.
Yeah. But I think about that in relation to like the Mexican diaspora or just the Latino diaspora, like we just always have been in movement. You almost can't write about certain things within the Latinx context that doesn't deal with movement. Like when I envisioned Bang, my novel, I remember it was funny because the cover was just a kid. It's the worst cover in the world. I don't know if you've seen it. It's terrible. I cried when I saw it. And I was like, oh my God. They made it like a finger gun. And I was like, no, Bang is like the combustion engine. It's like an engine that moves. It's like, can I get a propeller or something on there? That's like, it's literally the entire book is about like different engines that are pulling or systems that are pulling and not pulling. And it was like a whole riff on, it was a metaphor. And I thought I was being clever and someone's like, let's put like a gun on it. I was like, no, that's like the word. Yeah. But movement.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Come to think of it, that's how I perceived it too when I saw the cover. It's different kinds of things.
Some people are like, is that you? And I'm like, no, that's, I would not be on the, you know, I don't know who that kid is, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah. Cool.
It's interesting that you mentioned that the movement of diaspora, because, you know, you're right. In now that I think about it, in Romani culture, the movement is often enforced by external elements, right? Mm-hmm. People assume that Romani groups were traveling because of the love of the free-spirited, you know, life and all of that. But usually it was because it was forced upon them. Yeah. I think that with generations, that creates this sense of yearning for understanding who you are in the process of movement. What happens if you don't have, let's say, what happens if you don't have a country, right? But you have to assimilate to a country and choose it as your own, even though you understand that it's not rooted, you're not rooted there, right? So it creates this dichotomy of character, of identity, which is rooted, but at the same time constantly moving. Yeah. You know, I have thought about this, but I haven't really like vocalized this before until you just said it.
Yeah, man, you got me thinking about so many things tonight. Unfortunately, we're kind of running out of time a little bit. But if you want, you can answer one last question really quickly, and then we'll go into the thing. Okay, so here's one. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, smiley face. 2 things I'd really be interested in. What keeps you writing in these strange times of COVID-19, and what are you working on at the moment?
What keeps me writing is that I don't want to go insane.
Yeah, I feel that.
And there's more time for retrospection. I can focus more, and I actually enjoy the fact that this is unusual for me. I thrive in situations where I have to kind of adjust and adapt. Again, probably comes from my own experiences in life, right? And what I'm working on right now is a collection of short stories inspired by animal behavior.
Oh, so that's cool.
I'm taking, you know, let's say praying mantis and the proclivity of the female mantis to eat their mate. And I'm transforming it into a human situation where just as an example, a woman who is starved on trend diets gets to the point where she cannibalizes her own husband. There's more to it. I know.
That's cool. We should just end it there. That's the perfect end. No, that sounds great, man. So how far are you along?
I'm halfway through. I'm still working through them. It's really fascinating because I'm doing a lot of animal behavior research. So reading all these books, which is not something I've done before. So
yeah, check it. The weirdest animal, like Washbären, the like raccoons. Are you familiar with raccoons? Yeah, they're weird, man.
You want me to research raccoons?
Yeah, you do, and it'll be a huge honor. You saw it here first on YouTube. Anyway, we'll end it there. I'm going to read this thing real quick. So before I forget, so Oksana, thank you so much for this really enlightening and beautiful conversation. I always enjoy, this is true, I always enjoy talking with you. We can't wait to read what's next from you, which is this Washbären story. And I'm looking forward to having that next conversation with you then. I'd like to also thank our sponsors, the DAAD, University of Leipzig, and Holtzbrink Publishing Group for making this event possible this evening. To that end, thank you all at home, you guys, for tuning in. We're so grateful you were able to join us tonight. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oksana.
Thank you. This was wonderful. Have a good day.
Yeah.
For real.